love the idea of this functional sock. Is there like a yoga pant for the foot? And I wasn't satisfied, I didn't see anything.
Who is the man redefining the sock business? Rob Fraser, a 5-time Team Canada cyclist, is building a $100 million sock empire. Today, we talk about innovative business models, legal challenges, fundraising, startup pitfalls, and so much more.
But imagine you have like the opportunity in your hand and you just fumble the ball, right? It's like, that's a hard thing to live with.
Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure, happy to be here.
I'd love to hear more about your past as a pro athlete and how that translated into a sock business.
It's a long story, but what I call kind of my past life. I was, a competitive cyclist, 5 times on the Canadian national team, and did that for about 10 years. And then when deciding to step away from the sport, the other side of that's not often talked about in the professional sport, especially in non-Olympic sports or non-traditional sports, there's not a lot of money in them. Injuries were piling up, and I was just like trying to figure out what the next thing would look like. In cycling, socks are a part of the culture. So and you know this as a cyclist, it's like there's laws. You've got
People judge you for your sock game.
It's like the number one thing. It's like, like don't get chainring grease on your calf. Like there's a lot of rules in cycling, and socks were certainly one. So I had spent 10 years living by the law of cycling socks. And so when I transitioned out of cycling, I still wore my cycling socks. I love the idea of this functional sock, but it's not very great outside of the bike. So I started looking around, it's like, is there like a yoga pant for the foot? And I wasn't satisfied, I didn't see anything. It's like, there's no great activewear sock, even though over the past 5-10 years, the entire apparel industry was shifting towards activewear and athleisure.
And so when you're talking about the athleisure market in general, do you think that you were in any way influenced by Lululemon? Obviously also another West Coast Canada brand.
Yeah, when I started the business, I kind of pegged 2 brands that I loved. It was Lululemon and Red Bull. I loved Lululemon for the aesthetic, and I loved how they were, in my opinion, still are like the leaders of activewear for all day. And then there was Red Bull. It was like, okay, they sell sugar water, but they've built this amazing brand with this prestige around athlete marketing. I love the exclusivity of it, and so yeah, you're right. Like those were the 2 brands I certainly pegged and built like a lot of aesthetic around.
I think what's interesting about those 2 brands that you mentioned as well is so much of their product and their connection to their audience and their customers is that they become an extension of their customer's identity. And so when you think about branding for product and consumer products specifically, what is your philosophy on brands?
My idea of branding is like, how do you integrate into somebody's lifestyle, right? And so like, if you look at socks as a category, I'd say there's not really a group of people that have like community around socks. There's community around coffee, there's community around food and other things, but socks is not really a category you see people meeting around on the weekend, but people meet around cycling on the weekend. So if you can tap into that community and then be a product inside of that community that people love and talk about, that's a way for your brand to kind of like catch fire. That's really what I focused on, is like, let's make the best product, but then infiltrate these sports that have community. And be the product of those communities. And so that looked like athlete marketing, that looked like ambassador marketing, that looked like event marketing, to basically show up where those customers were. If we think about our brand Outway now, the brand basically says like, if you're willing to put yourself out there, you're gonna have to carve your own way to achieve your personal best. So like there's like even a storyline there. It's like people like to, I don't know about you, but for me, there's brands that I wear and they make me feel a certain way. And so we want to be a part of that for a cyclist or for a runner.
Having that connection, it's a lot stronger than just one marketing message that we might see.
We polled thousands of our customers and just asked, why did you buy our product and why do you continue to buy it? And the story over and over and over again was like, I buy your product for X. And X was always some pursuit of personal best. And that was so inspiring. I was like, and that informed an evolution of our mission, which is to inspire personal best.
For me, Outway is not just performance, but it's also fun. They're really colorful, they're really unique.
I didn't want to just do, a new athletic sock. I wanted to merge like technical design with beautiful design and make something like exceptional so that it could be self-expressive but also high quality and go with you on your run, ride, or whatever. I think also in terms of our marketing and how we get the product out there and differentiate ourselves, like we say, come for the design, stay for the performance. Because like it's really hard in a digital space for someone to understand the quality or how the sock's gonna feel. We could say it's kind of like comfort, we could say all these things, but it's like, show don't tell.
And clearly, you've put a lot of thought behind every single detail and every aspect. And even that one notion of how do you let socks become a conduit to self-expression, I think on the face of it, a lot of people might think you're just a D2C sock business. That's a really, really simple business. But obviously, it's a lot more sophisticated than that. You run a much more elegant business behind the scenes. So I'd actually love to dig in a little bit more to get a better understanding. Is it just a direct-to-consumer business?
So we have Outway, which is mostly direct-to-consumer, and then we also have a separate business called Custom Lab, which is a sub-brand of ours where we make socks for other brands as well as other businesses. And then we do some wholesale on the Outway side as well. So there's a lot of different business models and complexities. And yeah, I mean, on the surface, like a direct-to-consumer sock business sounds simple, and I wish it was simple because it's friggin' hard. And there's a lot of moving parts.
I mean, things like inventory management. A lot of entrepreneurs won't think about that right off the bat. They don't have to think about, first of all, the timing to actually achieve that inventory and financing beforehand and getting product that you can actually generate revenue off of, and then holding on to it. And then if you hold on it for too long, it's like, what do you do? And then you have to think about the sales and marketing of it and distribution of those products. All of those pieces have to work in harmony for it to actually run as like a successful business. I think it's really interesting that you have a part of the business that essentially complements the other side of the business.
So Custom Lab is really cool because it flips a lot of the model as compared to D2C. So what we're doing there is paying a little bit of money in advertising and lead generation, but we're selling the project in advance. Someone says, I want 1,000 pairs of socks. We invoice them, capture payment right there and then. We do a little bit of upfront work with the design and whatever. So there's like a little bit of investment before we capture any money. But once we get the money, we hit go on producing it. So there's a production timeline, and then we have payment terms to the manufacturer. So we have a lot of free cash flow because we accepted money up front. Yeah. There's no inventory risk. So early on, what we did is basically save. We know our margins, so we saved what we owed, and then invested the profits of that into Outway to buy more inventory, to market, to grow. And so that was like what we call the economic engine of our business. It was our investor. We created a business that cash flowed and built Outway. Because if you look at Outway, it's the opposite. We have to make a bet and purchase all the inventory, pay to market it. So tons of upfront costs, hoping that we get a return.
So from an operational standpoint, it seems Custom Lab might be actually more attractive to you as a business, but you say it's still overshadowed by the size of Outway. Are you trying to move the business more towards Custom Labs?
I think like when I talk to like business people, investors, like Custom Lab is like a really exciting business because it doesn't require a ton of input. There is some moats in terms of supply chain. It's very profitable, it's cash flowing, but it's not sexy. So me, like the shiny object entrepreneur, I'm like, let's build the brand, let's build the next Lululemon or Red Bull. Custom Lab will never be like the sexy business, it'll never be the brand, but it's also high input. Everything we do needs to be like, someone needs to be making that sale. It's high touch, there's a lot of design going on. Outway, like at a certain scale, like we go to bed and we wake up with money. Like it's self-automated, there's a lot that we can do there. I got this advice from our friend Andrew. As I was running for the longest time, Custom Lab off the side of my desk is kind of just this thing that cash flowed. He's like, that's a great business. Like you should hire a GM, carve it out, hire around it and scale it. At the time, that sounds obvious, but that's like a scary move for an entrepreneur to make, is like take this thing you're controlling and like hire a GM. How do you hire a GM? Like how do you incentivize them properly? But I did it, and he's grown the business like 2-3x year over year because like he's focused on it, and this guy's crushing it. They're great. I'd say like they complement each other because the other benefit is like they help drive up volume at our factories, just help us get better terms and pricing on product. Outway is like on its way to being like the #1 sock brand in the world, but Custom Lab is by far the #1 custom sock company in the world.
And so when you're talking about Custom Lab starting out as off the side of your desk, as an entrepreneur, as a startup, I'm sure you're always thinking of new ideas, different ways to bring the business, different new projects. Have there been other ideas or projects that you've spent some time with and decided not to pursue?
Oh yeah, I mean the curse of entrepreneurship is like you just have like 100 ideas a day, and as I mature and get like I just chase less and less of them because I think like focus is the superpower that you need to harness in entrepreneurship. Throughout the years, we've certainly tried so many things. Like we built a sock subscription model within our business that we ended up winding down last year. We've done sports bras and underwear. We wound those down. We've done a lot of things. We've tested, and all of these things I'm talking about now were successful categories, but ultimately we're taking away our focus from the main thing. The other analogy I give our team is like, we're running a race and we're like winning. Yeah. And out of a corner of our eye, we like see this other race going on, and we decided to like just jump the barrier and enter, and we're like at the back of the pack. We're like, what are we doing? Yeah. You know, like let's go back to winning our race.
Diverting any sort of attention and time or resources is diverting time away from your mission of building that sock business. How do you think about hiring in general and bringing on new talent into your team?
So in the early days, it's really just like who's willing to kind of give this a go, and it's really on like, who's going to be in the trenches with you, right? It's like much less around, you want the skill sets obviously, but it's really who can grind it out, who can like figure it out, because this is going to be a wild ride.
And I find that usually in those early days, it's less so much about what you've done before, but what your potential is and how you're able to translate those experiences to how the business grows.
Yeah, certainly. And now hiring, it's like much more specific around like a certain goal. I think ultimately I'm looking for people that definitely fit the culture, because like it doesn't matter how amazing they are, if they disrupt the rest of the organization, it's just a non-starter. I recently got a big hire, like an executive hire wrong, like really wrong during Q2. And so that was very disruptive, and they've exited the business now, but.
How long did it take before you knew that it was the wrong person?
2 months. And in this instance, like I got a lot of things wrong, but what I did right was corrected it quickly, learned some lessons. Like I always say to my team, like we're willing to make mistakes, just not twice.
In your personal social media, you've been very public about wanting to build a $100+ million sock business. Why did you decide to declare that so publicly?
I believe that if you put something out there, like if I say something, I hold myself accountable to it. And I don't know, maybe there's a little bit about like, you're talking about it now, right? So it kind of like gets people talking, whatever. It's provocative a little bit. Like social media is certainly about just like talking shit here and there. Like to me, by saying it's like a kind of a larger than life goal for me. It's like really big. I think it's exciting to like put it out there and try to achieve it. So when I started the business in 2016, I wrote myself $1 million check, post dated a year out. I was like, because I've always been doing this. Like, and that was private. Like I didn't post that. I wasn't able to cash it a year later, but I was able to cash it.
You just scratch out the date and
right?
put a different date on it.
Yeah, but I had that much conviction. This is before I even sold a single pair. I was like, I'm starting this. I'm going to cash this check one day. I just think like it's really important to like put your goals out there and say what you want to do and try and do it, because like I think a lot of people are afraid to say what they really want to do or like put their goals out there because like, oh, now people are going to judge or they're going to hold me accountable. But I think that's good. Like, I think we should be like held accountable. And if you're going to say you're going to do something, do it, right? Yeah. And if you don't, then have a good reason it didn't happen, right? That's totally fine to fail too. Like, cool, whatever, but like I'm going to try.
I think it's really brave for you to do that. I think something that you said really resonated with me, which is a lot of people are afraid to say what they actually want to do and what they want to achieve. I'm definitely guilty of that. And I think hopefully people can see the approach that you've taken and take some inspiration from that as well. I think as entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, doing it for the first time, sometimes being bold and being naive about how bold you are can be a good thing because the journey is so scary. On the topic of social media, how do you think about your personal social media as it relates to the brand's image? As a founder, often your identity is very much tied to what the brand is doing. And so how have you found that this experience like for you from a personal social media standpoint?
I think I've leveraged it well, especially Twitter. Like Twitter's like a magical place for business, in my opinion. It's how I've met, well, we wouldn't have met if it wasn't for Twitter. Like we basically raised a bunch of money for our business off of Twitter and connections made off of Twitter. My life has changed because of Twitter. Hopefully like a younger entrepreneur or someone's following being like, oh, this is possible. Why I put out like, I want to build a $100 million sock company or I want to do X, Y, and Z is because like, I put $1,000 of my school loans in to start this business, and it's where it is now because of that. And like literally just brute force, like just convincing myself it could be done. This is a story of like just figuring it out, and I made a ton of mistakes.
Let's actually focus on that a little bit. You have been quite public and vocal about mistakes early on with your co-founder, about those trademark issues which led to the rebrand. Can you shed some light about that, and then also why you've been so open about sharing these challenges?
To frame it all, I have like an analogy I've been working on. I was like, there's many paths to success in business, millions, and almost none of them are replicable. So like you look at someone's success, like you can't take that same path. However, on every one of those paths, there's the same potholes, the things that you want to avoid. Like these are like the laws of business. And I feel like I've run over a lot of these potholes. And so I'm trying to like yell from the mountaintops about these things, like co-founders, for example, like we'll start there. This takes down a ton of businesses of co-founder disputes. It's like one of the leading causes of businesses not working in the early days. It's like the co-founders get into a fight. It's super detrimental to your time, your energy, and the funds of the business. And when you start a business, especially if it's your first one, you're starting in college, no one has any idea what they're doing. Think of like, I equate it to like dating. Because like when you start dating someone new, it's all exciting. They can't do anything wrong. But then think a year in, like sometimes the way they breathe will piss you off, right? You're like, but like you got to think like you're making these really important decisions as co-founders and in your business in the honeymoon phase. So like you're not thinking of everything that could go wrong. You've never done it before. You're not really probably having the hard conversations around values, money, etc. You're working on this exciting idea, you're having fun, you're going to change the world, or maybe you're just killing time. In my case, I was in college. I had a great friend I was going to school with at the time. We were doing class projects together, working outside. He was working with me in a job outside of school as well, and we got on really well. We got along as friends and as coworkers really, really well. And so when it was time to start the business, it's like, this would be much more fun to do with somebody than do it solo. Because I didn't think it would actually work. You know, like I started the business with 3 years of school left. I just thought I was going to kind of like mess around and learn some lessons and hopefully it worked. So I go to him, I was like, you want to do this with me? We like split it 50-50. We didn't even really know what we were doing. And then slowly but surely it starts to work. And like my personality is like, if it starts to work, I'm going to go all in.
Yeah.
That was my whole life. And so as each day goes by, months go by, like the kind of value alignment around like what hard work is. And in hindsight too, he wasn't an entrepreneurial person. Like he didn't have, we talked about my entrepreneurial kind of tendencies leading up. He didn't have those tendencies. And like you can't really make someone an entrepreneur in the moment just because they're in this business now. And so there was just like, it just kind of slowly but surely kind of the divide got larger. And also like I then started getting obsessed with business because I was like, I need to learn this thing. I need to like consume everything I can, read every book, watch YouTube, and learn this language of business and learn how it works. And he didn't share that same passion and desire. And so like our ability to even have conversations around simple business things just became impossible. And so over time, about like a year and a half in, that friction and kind of the work, it just kind of hit a boiling point where he's like, I quit. But we didn't have a shareholder agreement, and so that gets super messy. It's like, how do you figure that out? It got to the point where it was like I was doing everything with like such a minority position with no ability to make decisions that the only way to resolve with a shareholder agreement was to be like, hey, look, come to the table with a number to buy you all out, or I'm walking. Like I'm going to start something else because like I just can't do this anymore. I was pouring everything I had to. I was super burned out. It was just demoralizing, and I finally got to that point though where like it was just too painful to stay. Put a 2-week shot clock on it, and we luckily at the last day got to an agreement and bought them out. And that's when, like March of 2019, when we were able to finally start like really growing. What I tell like young entrepreneurs now, or just first-time entrepreneurs, is like a lot of people ask themselves, what happens if this goes wrong? And you also need to ask yourself, what happens if it goes right? Right? Because like that's what happened in this sense. Is like it didn't go wrong. If it didn't work, like we would have been probably still friends and in college or whatever and done something. Like it went right, and that kind of highlighted our difference in values around hard work and how we want to like our goals with the business, and we
also
didn't
expose that you didn't have the right foundation to set the business up for success in
oh,
the long
exactly
term.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't so, and I also say is like this was the worst scenario because like it's really easy to kind of like pack it up and have a failure when it doesn't work, but imagine you have like the opportunity in your hand and you just fumble the ball. Right? It's like, that's a hard thing to live with. But also, I didn't know any better. Like, where do the resources exist for someone who doesn't know business or is in business school to like, about a shareholder agreement or like spending a few $1,000s to go to a lawyer to do it? It's like, I don't have that money. I didn't have that money. It's like, this is kind of like the problem that still exists for young entrepreneurs.
How did this interplay with the trademark challenges that you mentioned?
We were raising this $3.2 million. Like the day of closing, I received this cease and desist. It's like the most dramatic thing ever. I have to like go back and say to all the investors like, hey, you know how I had like a rep and warranty in there saying like there's no pending litigation? Like, surprise. It was like a good gut check for all the investors. Like I was like, hey, like money was in the account at this point. I was like, I'll send your money back. Like if you want to bail on this investment, like no problem. Totally get it. The landscape's changed. We're gonna have to embark on this journey that has an unknown. Not one person bailed. What I've learned though is that like this is not unique to us. I think in entrepreneurship it's like a lonely journey, and like the talking to other entrepreneurs or people who have been down that road has been super important to realize that like, oh, they're getting either sued or threatened all the time. Like it just happens. But when your first one comes down, it's like it's happening to me, and I'm the only one in the world this is happening to. It's like my whole world like crumbled at that moment. It was like very, very like jarring. In the end of the day, like these are not unique situations. And I've started to embrace them. Like we've got cease and desist letters since I framed them. I'm like, these are like acknowledgement that we're doing something disruptive. If people are noticing and they're trying to fight dirty, I'm like, great, we're ruffling feathers. And it's because we're stealing market share. So it's like, it's paying dues. We'll build systems around how to fight, because like now we have a system. Like we know what to do. We've got like attorneys all over the place. It was extremely painful to like turn the ship with a new name that like was also protectable, that also worked into the oh man, I don't ever want to do it again. It was like so painful, but like learned a ton through the process, which is like generally the silver lining in all these things is like, I've only been in the game for 7 years, but I feel like I've had a lot of unfortunate things happen, but like it's accelerated my learning so much.
I mean, 1 year in a startup is like 10 years in real life. You'll get gray hairs by the end of this.
That's why I cut my sides so short now, or else this like it goes all gray. It's just like, oh man, I got old all of a sudden.
And I think these learnings serve as a really important reminder to a lot of entrepreneurs out there, because a lot of the legal, tax, finance, they're not the fun things that you get to be able to show off to your friends, but they really are critical. They're the infrastructure, they're the plumbing of your business. They can make or break your business in a lot of ways that you might not think about until something bad happens. It seems like you have a very supportive investor group and board. Did you have to raise this money, or was there something strategic behind the people and the network that you're building?
We didn't need to raise the money, so we had run a profitable business for 5 years. We were growing off of cash flows, averaged 101% year-over-year growth since the start, which was pretty cool. But having gone through the co-founder thing and then being like a solar founder and like growing to this point, things were getting harder. I didn't have anyone to turn to. I didn't have a network. And so I started to slowly build a network throughout the 2021 year. It actually started with our mutual friend, Andrew Wilkinson. I DM'd him on Twitter. I didn't know he lived in Victoria. So I DM'd Andrew, we met, and he like opened my world to all these people, a lot of intros. It's like his superpower. So I met so many interesting people. So that whole year, I called it like my media tour. I just started meeting people, like absorbing the insights and just like obsessing over it, because like, oh, this is like way better than books and podcasts. And then eventually those people were like, can we invest? I was like, okay, like, so you want to give me advice and money? Like, this feels like cheating.
Feels too good to be true.
Yeah, it's like, what's the catch? But I kind of resisted because I had such a negative past with partners in the business. However, the motivation was like, I need support now. Like this isn't going to be my last business. So I was like, okay, there's 3 parts here. We can capitalize the business. Great, because we've never really, like we've always run a tight ship. We could actually make some bets now and invest. We can bring in some advice. Like I don't know what I don't know. These people have built hundreds of millions and billion-dollar companies, the people on our team. It's like, great, I can like go to them and they have got like, they give me advice anyways because they're in my network, but now they've got like some incentive and alignment. So like I'm gonna get more attention, more time and advice. Also, like the thing I'll just talk about on this thing is like, at that point, I sold shares on secondary too. As like, as you know, as a startup founder, you don't pay yourself like at all. So I was like, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, was like supporting us. She worked in the government and she was making the money and she was the steady hand. I was like the guy trying to make it work, the entrepreneur. So at that point, it's like 5 years in the trenches, going into like personal debt for the buyout or for the businesses and whatever, taking a ton of risk. I was like, okay, like I had a young child at this point too. So like part of it was actually like given the businesses at a state where it wasn't a startup anymore, like it was self-sustaining. Raising money was kind of like 3-part in that way of like capitalize the business, take a bit of chips off the table personally to like secure myself, and then getting the advice and the network brought in. And I was like, that's a great recipe and a mixture to kind of like take that next step. When people ask for fundraising advice, I say like, build a business worth investing in.
And be the person that they want to invest in. Because I think that support that they showed you was really a belief and trust in you as a leader. And so I'm actually curious because you've taken the business now from 0 to 1. And now you're taking it from 1 to 100. So through this process, what have you learned about yourself as a leader?
I think like I've evolved with the business. I think like I've made a very conscious effort to get out of my own way. I think like, and that's been just by surrounding myself with people that have done the thing, like I said, like, and asking like, what are the common mistakes? What are the potholes? Because in the early days, the 0 to 1, like you have to do all the work. Like you've got to be in the weeds. You've got to be like, there was a point where I was making the socks. I couldn't afford to hold inventory. So like we'd buy blanks and I bought all the machinery to actually apply the designs. So I would start the day making socks and then answering customer service emails, packing the socks. I was doing it all, and for years. then it gets to a point where like you need to hire people and you need to get out of the way. And that's like, I think a lot of, where a lot of founders will falter is like, can they get out of their own way? Can they trust other people to do the work? Which is the only way you're gonna scale. I think like removing the ego, which was like, I think this was probably the hardest part for me, was like in my past career of cycling, it's on me. I am the guy. I've got to win the race. There's no one else that's gonna ride the race for me. And so like that served me well in the early days. But then it's like, oh, like actual success in business is like letting other people run the race. But I think what I do well is like I'm out of the weeds. Like I don't do the day-to-day stuff anymore. I've got really great leaders and then support roles underneath them. The last year, certainly, like even since raising, has been like building the business internally to like scale as well, right? Because like you said, like what's the point of doubling revenue if the infrastructure folds underneath you? It's like, but I say like I'm married to the game. Like I want to like do this, and I want to be the one that can take it to where it needs to go. And so like I'm willing to morph.
And also finding the points of leverage. I think something that has been a common thread in terms of your growth journey from an external perspective is that in all of these situations, not only have you learned the lessons, but you've been able to translate them into how do you leverage those learnings? How do you leverage your strengths and the strengths of the people around you in order to take that next step in your business or take it to where it goes? And I think being open to that process is something that can be difficult and can be scary, but you seem to have done a very, very good job at that. Do you ever look back and regret stepping away from your pro athlete career?
No, I wish I did it sooner. Yeah. I think honestly, and like I said, my sport career was very like entrepreneurial. I think I was always meant to be in business, but I manifested those tendencies in sport because I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. I didn't have entrepreneur models, like anyone to model it after. And so like for me, kind of it was either like school or sport. Like, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna just go all in on this cycling thing because I didn't really enjoy school. I think had I found entrepreneurship earlier, I would have like done that too. I think I'm actually better at this than I was at sport. Because if I look back to what I enjoyed the most about sport, it was the preparatory stuff, it was the planning, the marketing, and just showing up to the start line. Like I was never the fastest or most talented, but I was the most prepared, and that's like why I won.
I love hearing how passionate you are and how you've translated from your passion from sport into business. And like you said, you're showing up at the start line, you're having prepared, and I'm so excited to see where Outway grows from now, and I can't wait for you to declare that $100 million goal. Before I let you go, I actually do have a few speed round questions. If you could start any business tomorrow that's not in the stock business, what would it be?
I would start this might be a little longer answer than a speed round, but I'll keep it concise. I want to start something that helps athletes transition into entrepreneurship. So bridging that gap. When athletes lose their identity, they're generally especially professional athletes, they're leaving like this exceptional life where they reach their biggest goals from when they were kids, but they end that life when they're very young still, generally early 20s. And so they enter, generally speaking, and I went through this too, like the depressive period of like, who am I and what do I do? I think those mindsets and those people have unique talents and abilities to go in entrepreneurship. So finding a way to like bridge that gap. So that'd be like part one is like creating that infrastructure. Part two would be like infrastructure to either invest in those people. So like a venture studio style thing, to actually take, that unique individual, unique idea and marry them and invest in something. And then three would be a center. So this would be one center where you do all three of these things. So the third one would be treating current entrepreneurs like athletes and providing resources to them for like mental performance, nutrition. Because I do think like you can actually gain an edge in business if you're like operating better, and like I think there's so much infrastructure in sport around the mental game and physical game to perform better in sport, but that doesn't exist in entrepreneurship. But we see between our network and our friends, we care about these things, but it doesn't exist as a product. And I think I would start that business. It's just like the sport of business, and that would be like the culmination of those three things. And I will do that. That's the $1 billion idea. I'll put it out there. My goal is to start that the next 3 years.
That's a juicy one. I agree with all the sentiments there. What is one non-negotiable in your day?
I'm not that life hacker guy. I'd say like now more than anything, it's like sleep.
What is one book you're reading right now?
I just started Open, the Andre Agassi bio. I read all the business books when I was starting, and now they get a little dry. So now I like reading just about top performers and like how did they do what they did and like how did their lives materialize.
I'll have to check that out. And last but not least, where can people find you and stay up to date on what you're doing?
Twitter's best. Just search Rob Fraser on Twitter. I should pop up at ROBB Fraser. I don't spell my name ROBB, but my middle name is Brent, so it's ROBB Fraser. Twitter's the best thing. LinkedIn I do as well, but like LinkedIn's just discount Twitter.
Well, thank you so much for spending this morning with me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me. It's super fun.
Legit.